This is the first video I'm going to be making with monetization on this channel, and here I am immediately throwing that out the window. I am going to be discussing the 2007 novel 13 Reasons Why by author Jay Asher, as well as its 2017 Netflix adaptation of the same name. This will involve me going over a variety of difficult topics, including depression, self-harm, suicide, substance abuse, sexual assault, and all of these topics will be centered around minors, albeit fictional ones. If you have trouble hearing about any of these topics, I recommend you proceeding through this video with caution, or just skip the video entirely. Your mental health comes first. And now on to the nonsense. If you know anything about the TV show 13 Reasons Why, you do not need me to tell you that this program has been mired in controversy since its first season aired up until its last season, which released in 2020. This show, telling the story of main character Clay Jensen learning the truth about the suicide of his fellow classmate Hannah Baker through 13 cassette tape recordings that she made before her death, has been widely criticized for its handling of such a sensitive subject matter. Everyone from general audiences to actual psychologists have condemned the show for potentially glorifying suicide while not providing adequate resources for its young and at-risk viewers to turn to. The backlash against the first season was so severe that a PSA-style address from some of the cast was added to the beginning of the first episode, advocating that if anyone watching was struggling, that they should reach out to someone for help or visit the website 13reasonswhy.info. A short message was also added to the credits of every episode, encouraging people to visit this same website.
We hope our show can help viewers start a conversation.
In addition, a particularly lambasted scene depicting the character of Hannah Baker performing the act that actually ended her life was edited to remove any direct shots of this action from the scene. Only the moments directly before and the aftermath were kept in, although an image from the scene does still briefly appear in an earlier episode. And there are a couple of dream sequences / hallucinations that don't directly show this moment, but still clearly demonstrate how Hannah Baker died, are still in the show to this day. Many of the same criticisms aimed at the show has also been directed at the book it was based on, especially considering that the author, Jay Asher, was significantly involved in the production of the show and has defended the show in the past. There have been many instances over the years of schools banning or challenging this book due to concerns over its effects it may have on young students reading it. And honestly, these criticisms have some merit to it. This is not a perfect book. However, I do believe some of the hatred towards the book has been amplified due to the misgivings of the show, and I don't think that is entirely fair. I want to judge this book on its own while also acknowledging the things that it did better than its adaptation. I'm approaching this analysis as someone who first read the book back when it initially released, as a preteen, the target demographic, and as an adult in the present day who has a bit more knowledge on the subject it tackles. I want to show you all that this book isn't a complete trash fire, at least. Also, to be clear, I am specifically criticizing both the book and the show based on how they tackle the taboo topics that they're dealing with. There are many shortcomings that these two pieces of media have as art or entertainment, but that's not what I want to focus on here. So I won't be talking about things like the pacing, the strength of the characters, the acting, the dialogue.
FML forever.
FML forever.
FML forever.
Little did I know you would F my L forever.
There are many other places you could turn to for that kind of critique. Also, any discussion that I will be doing of the show will be focused exclusively on Season 1. The events of the book only take place in Season 1, and I have personally not watched beyond this point. And I'm not going to watch these later seasons because I don't wanna. They look really bad. I have suffered enough for this video. This is a video on entertainment media, so I will now begin the obligatory plot summary. I'll try and keep it brief and focus mainly on the analysis. The book 13 Reasons Why opens on a brief flash-forward scene of our main character, Clay Jensen, at a post office mailing a set of tapes to a girl named Jenny, and not doing very well. Once it's sent off, we flash back to a day previously where Clay is receiving the tapes himself. Those familiar with the show will already notice some key differences here. One, that Clay does in fact send these tapes off to the next person and doesn't release them, and the book takes place over a significantly shorter amount of time. It seems to take Clay several days, if not weeks, to listen through all the tapes rather than the single day here. Keep this in mind for later. Clay finds this package on his doorstep, unwraps it to find 7 cassette tapes with 13 of the 14 sides marked chronologically, and starts listening to the first tape on an old stereo in his garage. On the first tape, he hears the voice of Hannah Baker, a classmate and somewhat acquaintance of Clay that had taken her own life a few weeks prior. She states that she is recording these 13 tape sides as her version of a suicide note, each recording being one of the reasons why she did what she did. And if you're listening, you're one of the reasons. Clay naturally freaks out, wondering what he did, but finishes listening to the first recording. Hannah talks about how her first kiss with a guy named Justin was ruined based on the rumors that spread afterwards. Justin had apparently bragged that more had happened than just a kiss, and most of the school had believed these rumors, including Clay himself. Clay decides to listen to more of the tapes, but he realized that he can't really do that in his garage, especially since his mom keeps interrupting him. So, under the guise of doing a project with his friend Tony, he visits its house and borrows his Walkman so he can listen to it with headphones. He then spends the rest of the night wandering around town listening to the rest of Hannah's tapes. At the same time, he is visiting places on a map that he had found in his locker a few weeks prior that he was unknowingly given by Hannah. It is marked with important locations where events in the tapes took place. The next two sides tell the story of Hannah's first friends at her new high school, Alex and Jessica. She talks about how they drifted apart, mainly because Alex and Jessica had started dating, but their friendship definitively ended in a very dramatic way. There was some kind of falling out between Alex and Jessica, and so Alex had decided to make a sort of hot or not superlative list of the freshman class. He named Hannah as having the best ass and Jessica as having the worst ass to get back at her. Not only did this list completely ruin the last scraps of friendship in this trio, even resulting in Jessica slapping Hannah, it also had worse repercussions for Hannah in the future. This worsened rumors about her being slut, and even caused another classmate to grope her in a convenience store. The next recording escalates significantly in the description of Tyler's influence on Hannah. He was a peeping Tom who would take pictures of Hannah in her room at night. Hannah was able to catch him in a trap by staging a somewhat provocative scene with another girl from school, Courtney. The next tape starts with Courtney's story. After the whole Tyler thing, Hannah was disappointed that Courtney didn't want to actually be friends with her afterwards. Courtney does invite Hannah to a party, but it doesn't really seem like a genuine moment of trying to reach out. She seems only interested in getting a ride from Hannah, doesn't hang out with her at said party, and even spreads rumors about Hannah to a guy at the party, seemingly just to get rid of him. Hannah suspects that Courtney hadn't invited Hannah out because she genuinely liked Hannah, but because she wants everyone to like her, and the invite was only given out to save face after ignoring her for a bit. This is a very tame reason for Hannah to describe after Tyler, but I digress. At this point, we actually meet someone else on the tapes in person, that being Marcus, a boy that we will hear the story of later. Clay has finally made it to Tyler's house since it's marked on that map, and Marcus finds him there. He lives nearby, and he keeps an eye out for anybody visiting Tyler's window. Clay confronts Marcus about his place on the tapes, but Marcus just brushes it off and doesn't seem to feel any remorse for his actions. I want to pause here and talk about a change that the show made. This scene in the books is the only time that we meet anybody from the tapes besides Clay and a brief glimpse of Mr. Porter at the end of the book. The show, having taken place over a longer period of time, introduces us to everyone on the tapes intimately. We see exactly how the tapes affect everyone and how much people are genuinely hurt by them. One could understand why the show would make this change on paper. 13 hour-long episodes with pretty much just Clay Jensen looking sad will get old really quickly. But this change has a pretty major consequence. One of the major criticisms of the TV series is the romanticization of suicide, showing how Hannah got back at everyone who hurt her through these tapes. We see how heavily affected people like Justin and Alex are after hearing Hannah's words, and that they are now genuinely showing remorse that they didn't when Hannah was alive. The show basically says that Hannah won doing what she did. She successfully got revenge on the awful people in her life by ending it. Can you see how that might be considered a bad message to tell your audience? But in the novel, the entirety of the story is told through Clay's perspective, his experience, his reaction to the tapes. And he is emotionally devastated by them. But crucially, that's not what Hannah wanted. She says very intentionally in Clay's tapes that she does not want to hurt him. She cares about him, at least more than the other people in her life. She didn't want to hurt him, but he's probably the one that's going to be most torn up by listening to these. Marcus clearly doesn't care, and someone like Tyler might be spooked, but only because he thinks he's going to get in trouble. But he definitely would have gotten in trouble if Hannah had told someone about him while she was still alive. There's a brief mention of how Justin and Alex look like they're not doing well, but this is like one sentence, and it pales in comparison to the focus on Clay. This decision emphasizes how when people take their own lives, the people they care about are going to suffer the most. There's a chance that people who are cruel to you might feel bad, but those cases are few and far between. Your loved ones will take the brunt of the grief, and while this isn't a perfect solution in the book, it's a much better presentation of the story than the choices that the show makes. Let's get back to the scene, which is pretty similar to what happened in the show. Marcus tries to get Clay to throw a rock at Tyler's window, and Clay refuses. This is a clear message on not projecting guilt on other people, you know, he who is free of sin shall cast the first stone and all that. Just further emphasizing that Marcus is not taking accountability for his actions while Clay is taking the brunt of the guilt here. Also, this scene demonstrates the unfairness of the treatment of Tyler in this scenario. Sure, Tyler is a piece of shit. No doubt about that. But what does stoning his window actually accomplish? He probably isn't going to violate anybody's privacy like he did with Hannah after this, but again, Hannah talking to anyone with any level of authority while she was still alive would have accomplished the same result. And do you really think Tyler is going to be a better person after this? He will most likely just repress his feelings and urges for a bit until they eventually come out again in more damaging ways. Tyler also serves as a scapegoat for a lot of the other people on the tapes. Like, you really think Courtney is going to genuinely reflect on her actions of being kind of rude to someone at a party when there are actual criminals on these tapes? Lumping all these individuals together is shown to have the opposite reaction that Hannah wants. Those who did extraordinarily despicable things are being pushed further into the shadows, not held accountable for their actions, while those with lighter grievances place all the blame on those same people. I don't know why I'm on the tapes. What I did was nothing compared to these other people, and the book gets that message across by having Clay reject that notion. Everyone that Hannah's mentioned played a part in what happened to her. Any one of them could have helped Hannah if they were a bit more attentive or Hannah communicated better. Hannah's choice was wrong, and she did not do what she wanted to accomplish. And the show ruins this by having Clay not throw the stone initially, but does take a compromising photo of Tyler through his window because he still has his blinds open for some reason, and then sends it to everyone, stating completely the opposite of what the scene was originally trying to get across. It's not even like Clay reflects on this later in the season and realizes it was the wrong thing to do. He actually goes on a crusade against everybody in the tapes, and it works out fine, and he wouldn't have done it if it wasn't for Hannah's tapes. Great! Let's move on to the next tape, this one starting with Marcus's story. Hannah went on a date with Marcus after he got her name from a matchmaking service the school was doing for Valentine's Day. Which, side note, did any of your schools actually do this? Mine did not, and this plot point sometimes pops up in sitcoms and stuff, and I just cannot believe that this is a thing that actually happens. It seems wildly inappropriate. Anyway, the date does not go well. Marcus takes forever to show up, and when he does, it's with a group of friends. He then makes an advance on Hannah, which she rejects. He doesn't take it very well, and he leaves. The next recording is about a boy named Zach, who had actually approached Hannah after this moment and tried to make her feel better. Hannah does not react at all to his kindness, and he leaves as well. Hannah later discovers that Zach, seemingly in retaliation for this moment, but his actual motivations aren't very clear, has been stealing notes from other students to Hannah from her compliment bag in their peer communication class at school. Just another chink in our armor with how cruel people can be. We are reintroduced to another character around this time, that being Clay's mom. He initially only took half of the tapes, but he's running out, and so he asks his mom to bring the rest of them to the diner he's at, the same diner that Hannah had her date with Marcus. She brings the box holding the tapes, not knowing what they are, but she can tell that Clay is lying about something and is clearly upset. She reiterates that she supports him, realizes that he needs some space, and lets him be while making him promise that he won't be out too late. This isn't the only time she reaches out to him. If it was, I would label this as a bad interaction, but she does call him later while he's still not at home, and only lets him be when she hears from his friend that he's okay and not standing on the edge of a cliff or something. This is a short but very important moment for the book. A major issue in the show is that all the adult characters just suck so bad. Every one of them is awful. Every parent is neglectful, if not outright abusive. The professionals that are meant to help kids care more about saving the school from legal trouble than actually helping said kids. Even the ones that do want to help are portrayed as not having the time to do so. Providing resources and help to those who are struggling is immensely important. Just one person being nice to them could be the reason that they change their mind and start actually seeking help. But this show says that no one will be be kind to you, even the ones whose job it is to do so. I do believe the inclusion of Mr. Porter in the book is necessary. There are people in positions of authority that will let you down, and acknowledging that issue is important. It keeps readers from feeling pandered to by saying, if you reach out to one person, then everything will be fine, when it's not always that easy. But the book counteracts this notion by showing adults that do care. Clay's mom is the major example, someone who is shown not to judge and will love Clay no matter what, but there are a bunch of more subtle examples, like the guy behind the counter at the diner who doesn't charge Clay for his milkshake because he can tell that he's dealing with something, or the bus driver that says that he'll stop anywhere to let Clay off because everyone else on the bus is asleep. Small moments that show that the world isn't completely against you, and there are people who want to help, even strangers. But the show doesn't have any of that. Parents don't seem to care at all about their kids. A few start to rethink this after Hannah dies, but that's it. Even Clay's parents, who seem to care somewhat at least, seem completely clueless on how to actually help their son and make a bunch of stupid decisions that make the situation worse. That's what makes that plea at the end of every episode for people to visit the 13 Reasons Why website ring so hollow. Why should someone bother reaching out when it doesn't seem like anyone will care? It comes across as very short-sighted. After talking with his mom, Clay continues the tapes. The next tale is about Ryan, a school journalist who published a poem Hannah wrote without her permission. This makes her feel like not only is her body an object for other people's amusement, but her thoughts as well. I really don't understand why Asher had Tyler's thing so early on in the story. It really makes these less egregious moments really lose their impact. I said I wasn't going to talk about the general quality of the writing, but God, it is so hard sometimes. The next tape is Clay's tape. Tony, the guy that Clay stole the Walkman from, actually reappears in the story at this point to give him support while he listens to his tape and most of the rest of the tapes as well. Tony isn't on the tapes, but he does know about them. Hannah left a copy of them with Tony to release if anybody stopped listening to the tapes. This is to ensure that Justin or anyone else listening didn't just throw them away immediately. Clay's story is another simple one. Him and Hannah were acquaintances at school, and they worked at a movie theater together over the summer, but they really didn't know each other outside of this. Clay actually had a crush on Hannah, but never acted on them because of all the rumors about her. But Hannah also kind of had a crush on him, and had heard good things about him. So she goes to a party that she knows he'll be at, and tries to connect with him. And they do. They have a pretty deep conversation, hit it off pretty well, and even start making out in a room together. But Hannah panics, remembering all of the terrible things that boys have done to her in the past, and doesn't trust this nice moment. She tells Clay to leave, and he does. That's it. The next recording is one of the more controversial moments in the story. I will reiterate again, this section and in multiple parts after this, we are going to be discussing explicit depictions of sexual assault. After Clay leaves the room, another couple enters. Hannah does not say who it is, but Justin, who is at the party, knows that it is Justin and Jessica. They had started dating sometime after Jessica and Alex had broken up. Hannah later confirms that the guy is in fact Justin, but still does not say Jessica's name to protect her identity. Jessica is very drunk, and Justin soon realizes this. He puts her to bed and leaves the room. But someone else is outside. Hannah doesn't say who this is, but Clay assumes that it is a guy named Bryce. This is a character that has popped up a couple times earlier in the story, doing just abhorrent behavior. Justin and this person talk for a bit, and then Justin lets him into the room. What happens next is not described in detail, but the word rape is used, so there is no ambiguity about what happened in that bedroom. My God, if you guys can hear construction work when I'm talking about one of the most sensitive issues in the whole video, I'm gonna be so pissed. Not only is this a traumatic thing for Hannah to witness, but the guilt of her not acting to stop it takes its toll. Hannah now doesn't want to ask for help because she thinks she doesn't deserve it, that she is a bad person for failing Jessica. She was drunk and scared, but that doesn't matter to her in retrospect. The show takes a different approach to this. It blatantly shows what Bryce did to Jessica for an uncomfortably long time. This was entirely unnecessary. The showrunners in the mini documentary published on Netflix called Beyond the Reasons say they presented the scene in this way, and a later one which we will get to, because they didn't want to shy away from the brutality of this act. They wanted the audience to feel how horrible it would be to go through this, and that it would be a disservice to the victims of SA if they didn't. You know who doesn't need to feel the horribleness of this act? The victims of SA who might be watching your show, dumbass. And the amount of people who have gone through something like this is very high, higher than you think it is. So the likelihood of someone like that watching this scene is pretty high, even with your trigger warning at the beginning of the episode. Seeing a very real looking depiction of rape while watching a TV show that's meant to be for entertainment can be incredibly traumatic and trumps any kind of realism that you're going for. Any level of artistic value you were going for is not worth harming your audience. You're not challenging people, you're being gross. The scene in the book is as disturbing as it needs to be and is not at all explicit. Anyone not swayed by the book's version is not going to be more sympathetic towards the show's version. And this isn't even the worst thing the show does. Back to the plot. And hey, let's take a break from the tapes and let's hear Tony's story, why not? Tony was given the backups by Hannah, even though they didn't really know each other all that well. Hannah went to give Tony her bike since he has an old car that breaks down a lot. The book is surprisingly good at telling readers the signs that someone might be considering taking their own life. Giving gifts, suddenly seeming better after a period of depression, even dramatic appearance changes are all signs of this that Hannah demonstrates. It becomes less subtle when Hannah talks about a list her teacher gave her going over these signs, but it pays not to be subtle about these sort of things. Anyway, when Hannah gives Tony her bike, he, at the same time, gives her the recording equipment to make her tapes. Tony did not know that that was what it was going to be used for and feels guilty for not acting sooner. Hannah thus trusted Tony enough to make sure her mission was accomplished after her death, but not enough to confide in him before the fact. Back to the tapes. Hooray. In the last tape, Hannah says that she doesn't want Clay to send them to the perpetrator since he will most likely destroy them and then skip town. So that tape is officially for Justin, and Clay is told to skip sending the tapes to him again and instead send it to the next person on the tapes, Jenny. After the party from the last couple of tapes, Hannah's pretty drunk, so she gets a ride home with her classmate Jenny. On the way home, Jenny knocks over a stop sign. Hannah wants to tell someone, but Jenny doesn't want to get in trouble, so she abandons Hannah there. When Hannah finally reaches the phone to call the cops, it's too late. A crash happened because of this knocked down stop sign, and a senior at their school died in the collision. In the show, everybody believes that it was because the student was drunk driving, and it's a bit unclear if that actually played a part, but in the book, everyone knows that the crash happened because of the stop sign, they just don't know who knocked it over. This is another shortcoming of the show. Through Hannah's tapes, the truth comes out about the crash, and the families get some closure. The parents now know that it wasn't their son's fault. Again, saying that Hannah made the right decision. But in the book, not only does this information not get out, what would it accomplish if it did? There wouldn't be any further catharsis for the parents. They know that it was caused by a knockdown stop sign. What does knowing who did it actually do for them? Jenny might get in trouble for her actions, but again, Hannah telling someone while she was alive would have had the same consequence. And the poor kid is still dead either way. Nothing is going to fix that. It seems like everything the show does is worse than the original story, and the next tape is no exception to that. And now we move on to Bryce's tape. Dear God, why am I making this video? So was Bryce not the guy at the party? What happened to not sending the tapes to him? Does she not care if the tapes get destroyed and he leaves town now? Or does she just not mind if Mr. Porter doesn't get the tapes since he's the only one left at this point? Was this Hannah's plan all along and she wants the tapes to actually get released? Anyway, weeks after this party, Hannah is alone, house-sitting, and she hears a new party happening nearby. She is pretty broken at this point with the guilt of Jessica and the crash, and she's on a pretty destructive path right now. She decides to go to the party and gets into a hot tub with Bryce in her underwear, fully aware of what will happen if she does. Bryce makes an advance on her, and she doesn't resist. The show was very different, of course, with Hannah trying to leave and trying to have him stop before he explicitly rapes her. Now, I want to make it clear, what happens in the book is very much not a consensual act. Hannah was not participating, she was turning away from him, she was actively fighting back tears. Anyone, even a teenage boy, should be able to read this situation and realize, hey, this girl doesn't want to have sex with me, I should stop what I'm doing. But you can see how an inexperienced teenage girl could read the situation and not know if it actually constitutes as assault, or if any authority figure would actually do anything in this case. This makes her conversation with Mr. Porter in the last tape make more sense. Hannah is being vague and not fully communicating what happened, and Porter doesn't respond appropriately. It is still clear that Porter fucked up in this situation. Even with what Hannah told him, while she might not want to press charges, the school should have had some response here. Keeping the two separate from one another in class, suspending him while an investigation takes place, even if police are not involved, referral to professionals with more resources that could help Hannah, pretty much anything than what he actually said, which was basically just tell her to move on. Hannah did kind of set up Mr. Porter for failure here, which does kind of make sense with the headspace she's in. She leaves a lot of stuff out, including Jessica, only seeks him out when she's at her breaking point, and he's dealing with a lot at the moment. A student did die like a week ago, and he's counselor for half of the school. He probably doesn't have the bandwidth to properly deal with this, but he did still fail her. And the show doesn't make sense in this scene because Hannah talks about what happened with Bryce the same way that book Hannah does, even though it is more definitively assault. Why is she being misleading about what happened? Hannah is portrayed as having enough emotional intelligence, at least, to acknowledge that what happened to her wasn't okay and that she needs to speak up to prevent this from happening to anybody else. Sure, people at this level of crisis are not thinking clearly and are often setting people up for failure once they've set their mind on taking their life. But this level of disconnect from what Hannah says to what actually happened is unbelievable, and it really cheapens the moment. There is another change that I want to go over here, and that is that the characters in the Netflix show are just objectively worse people. Nearly everyone. Bryce in the book is a scumbag. No two ways about it. But he's believably awful. Thinking it's okay to sleep with someone who's drunk, or if they don't actually say the word no, then it's fine. I have met several book Bryces in my life. Show Bryce, however, is like cartoonishly evil. And not to say that these people don't exist in the real world, they do, but it's not the kind of person that a typical teenage girl is going to be dealing with on a day-to-day basis. There's a level of separation there, less relatability. The message becomes, we have to get this guy, rather than we have to do a better job at teaching our kids what's right and wrong when it comes to sex, which further promotes the idea that Hannah did the right thing. Bryce is getting caught. Jenny, or Sherry in the show, is taking accountability for the crash. Everyone knows that Tyler is a creep now. So on. These are bad people, and they're getting what they deserve. Even people like Zach, Courtney, Marcus, whose stories don't really change that much, are still worse because they're all defending Bryce for some reason, a man that they know is a rapist. Take Justin. He doesn't just share a rumor about Hannah, he shares an upskirt picture of her as well. Rumors at that age can be pretty devastating since everything feels like the end of the world when you're a teen. But pictures? Those are something that can follow you beyond high school. This could affect her life forever. So yeah, it feels good in the show when we see his life falling apart and him being genuinely devastated by what Hannah says on the tapes. But that is not a message you want to tell the depressed teens watching your show, that they can get back at the bullies this way. The book does a better job at conveying this, shockingly, by showing what would realistically happen in this scenario. No one gets arrested, no one is held accountable, and innocent people get hurt. You really think Jessica is going to come forward with her story after hearing what happened on the tapes? Imagine if Hannah had just talked to Jessica and encouraged her to come forward with Hannah as a witness. It could have still gone terribly, but it would have had a much higher chance of actually getting the word out than these tapes. The world is a worse place after Hannah's death, and that is demonstrated in the text. Again, the presentation is not perfect. The assault is a bit more explicit in Bryce's scene with Hannah rather than Jessica's moment. It makes sense since it's Hannah telling her own story rather than someone else's, so she's a bit more comfortable going over the details. And again, she wants to hurt the people that are listening, but It wasn't needed. It could have been taken out and it would have been much more tasteful while still getting the point across. And of course, since we don't really see Jessica's point of view in all of this, her assault is sort of a plot point rather than her being a more fleshed out character. But that's kind of an inherent issue with the whole presentation of the book. There is one tape left. Hallelujah. This is her conversation with Mr. Porter the day she died and her giving life one last chance. I already went over this, so I won't dwell on it any longer, but there is one more event that we have to talk about. That being the actual death of Hannah. The book is very short, just saying Hannah overdosed, and Clay heard some rumors of a bathtub being involved. That's it. It's not that deplorable, and it does make sense that it is presented in this way. It's from the perspective of a teenage boy, one that we have seen already is very susceptible to rumors. But again, not the most tactful description, and would be better if it was presented differently or removed entirely. However, say it with me, the show does things a little differently. The entirety of Hannah's suicide, from beginning to end, is shown until her parents find her. This moment makes it impossible for me to believe that they actually consulted real psychologists in the making of this show. This is rule number 1 of depicting suicide. You don't show it, and this is not a new idea. The World Health Organization has a guide talking about how media should present stories on suicide. It has been updated over the years, but it was first published in 2003, and even then, rule number 1, do not describe the death. Don't describe the details, don't show photos, and especially don't do a visual depiction of the full event. And there is a basis behind this idea. Many studies have shown that suicide is contagious. One act often inspires another, whether it was someone close to them, peer pressure within the community, news coverage, or even popular media. And 13 Reasons Why is not exempt from this. The National Institute of Mental Health published a study in the Journal of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. They saw a 28.9% increase in suicide rates among U.S. youth from ages 10 to 17 in the month after the show aired. And they know the spike likely correlates with the show because they compared it to homicide rates. These two values tend to rise together, and there was no significant increase in homicide rates with this age group at the time. So while it isn't 100% confirmed that the show caused these deaths, it is highly likely that they had some kind of influence. No study like this was done on the book when it was published in 2007. I, of course, can't say for sure whether the book had a similar effect. I am a random person on the internet, not a psychologist. Do not take anything that I say for fact. I put all my sources in the description of this video if you want to do your own research and check them out for yourself. But I don't believe that the book had a similar effect on the audience that read it, let alone to this extreme. And yes, the show did remove the scene, but as I said in the intro, there are still moments earlier in the season that clearly show how Hannah died and can be just as harmful. In that Beyond the Reasons documentary I talked about before, they describe how the writers and actors met with psychologists and experts on sexual assault and suicide to discuss the more controversial scenes. The way they talk about these interactions seems like they were more focused on making the scenes as realistic as possible through their help, rather than presenting the information in the most respectful way that they could. That is the only way that I can rationalize the fact that this scene made it all the way through production with so many experts on hand. They weren't trying to educate, they weren't trying to be respectful, they weren't trying to start a conversation. They wanted to shock and to entertain and to get people to renew their Netflix subscription so they could see what crazy thing happened in the next season. As I said before, the novel 13 Reasons Why is not exempt from these issues, which is not surprising considering the author's reaction to the backlash of the show. The book could have definitely done a better job providing resources for these kids to turn to. The book definitely seems more helpful to those who know someone who is struggling rather than the people who are actually struggling themselves, which is a problem. I still think that this was a worthwhile thing to publish, and that Asher at least approached this work with the genuine effort to make a story that helps people. Not being willing to talk about these issues is what makes it such a problem to begin with. People feel ashamed to discuss these things, so they feel alone and don't seek help until it's too late. It has gotten a lot better over the years, but it is still a problem in America. And in 2007, this was pretty much the only material I had access to at the time that would even want to touch on mental health at all. That's what makes the whole start a conversation line in the PSA the show put out so annoying, because it's true in a way, we need to talk about these things. But there is a difference between normalizing talking about suicide and normalizing suicide itself. Depictions of suicide in media, even when not showing the act itself, can still cause that contagion that I mentioned earlier. It is a fine line to walk, but I do think that the book does a better job of walking that tightrope, even if it fails at times. In the end, it's better to openly talk about these things rather than censor them completely. It's like if, say, a media sharing platform didn't want the members of its site featuring sensitive topics in their content, which makes sense, especially considering some of the things the members did in the past, maybe involving a forest at some point? I don't know, just spitballing here. So they decided to keep people from discussing these topics by doing things like demonetizing videos, age restricting them, even removing the content entirely. These things can even happen if they just say certain bad words. But people still want to talk about these things because they are a part of life and the audience wants to hear them talk about it. And they rely on this content for a living, so they have to circumvent these rules somehow. So they say phrases like unalive themselves, or it rhymes with grape, or Kermit sewer slide. And while this method is understandable, it makes the discussion of said topics unserious from the get-go. So, in the censorship method of this proposed media sharing website, they in fact did not keep people from discussing these topics, and in fact ensured that they would not be talking about them with the care that they deserved, essentially doing the opposite of what they set out to do. And the people who run said website should probably approach this monitoring of content with a bit more nuance. That is, if they actually cared about kids and other impressionable groups being exposed to this content, rather than, ad companies still wanting to promote their products on said website. As like a random example. A lot of you might be wondering why I am defending this book so hard, one that I acknowledge has a lot of issues. Well, I think it would be best to give a bit of context as to what my life was like when I first read 13 Reasons, if you'll excuse me for being a bit sappy and personal for a second. Sorry. My high school was a bit of a mess, which is kind of expected since it was in Central Florida. We had a bad drug problem, many teenage pregnancies, multiple deaths, and life-changing injuries from people doing stupid things like drunk driving. And there were several of my fellow students that took their own life throughout all 4 years that I was at this school. I didn't know any of them personally, but I still felt this sort of overwhelming presence throughout these years. Many of my friends were going through hard times, depression, harming themselves. Oftentimes it felt like I was on the precipice of something really bad. Fortunately, I never had these feelings myself, at least not to this extreme, but I'll be honest, there were some really bad days. And there is this feeling of an overall lack of control. I can't remember exactly when I read 13 Reasons Why, but it was around middle school or early high school. That was the best time for me to have read this book. It might sound silly, but reading this book left me with the sense that I could regain some control. This sort of thing is not inevitable. What happened to Hannah Baker was not inevitable. There is something that I could do if a friend of mine, or even myself, felt like there was nothing left to do but end it all. Clay saying Sky's name at the end of the story really gave me a sense of hope, as cheesy as that sounds. Oh my god, I didn't talk about Sky at all, did I? Son of a bitch. It is not the sole reason I made it through high school. Far from it. But it helped. Like I said before, this was the only resource I had access to talking about mental health at that age, so it was a really low bar. However, I am not saying that this will be everyone's experience reading this book, especially vulnerable teenage girls. Having this expectation being put on the reader to fix things instead of providing resources to lean on in times of crisis can be just as harmful as it was helpful to me. If you see someone going through it, do not just hand them this book and think that everything will be okay, for the love of God. But what Jay Asher was going for with 13 Reasons Why was beneficial to me at a time where I could really have used it. And that is far more than I could say for anything the Netflix adaptation did. Thank you all for watching to the end, and I hope you all were able to see where I was coming from with this video. And if there is anyone out there still watching who is going through hard times, please know that you are not alone. There is no way that I, a stranger on the internet, can have any idea what you're going through and how hard it would be to get yourself out of that situation. But I know for a fact that there is someone that you can turn to for help. It could be family, friends, a professional, hell, it could be someone you haven't even met yet. but I promise you, there is someone out there who wants to hear your story and help you in any way that they can. I've put some resources in the description. There is no shame in acknowledging that you can't go through this alone. Thank you all again so much for watching, and I hope you will join me in my next video. And I promise it will be on a lighter note next time. Bye. Okay, fine, I did steal the naming convention from Folding Ideas' video on 50 Shades of Grey. What are you gonna do about it? You gonna call the cops? You gonna tell H bomber guy on me?